Okay, we are on to our next panel today, and in Maitland, I think they should have, maybe Mattel should have paid a royalty to Lacework for that Barbie. Yeah, and very interesting stories. I agree with the last comment. I've studied B&B a lot, and very little of B&B's creative communications and branding and advertising. And every time I've heard this story from Maitland before, it's very impressive what they have done, what they have done, been able to achieve with relatively limited resources. Okay, so I'm going to move on to introducing Sthanunathan, and Stan is going to introduce the panelists. After that, I've known Stan since he was the VP of Strategy Insights at the Coca-Cola Company. I got to know him when we were both serving on the advisory board. I think it was the government of Singapore to build an institute of consumer insights in Singapore. And if you worked with the Singapore government, anything they do, they're very systematic, thorough, and try to get some of the best people in the field, and Stan was one of them. Stan joined Unilever in 2013 as Executive Vice President of Consumer and Market Insights. He headed up the Insights function in London and retired from Unilever in 2021. Retirement within quotes, because soon after retirement, he's doing like half a dozen things, including started an AI machine learning company called iGenie, focused on delivering near real-time insights and ideas. He also co-authored a book titled AI for Marketing and Product Innovation. And recently, in 2022, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Market Research event. Please join me in welcoming Stan.
Discussion where two of them are going to be standing and two of them are going to be sitting. Never mind, don't worry. The other two chairs are coming. They're on their way.
We'll miss you again.
While the chairs are coming, let me take a few minutes to introduce the fellow panelists. We have Nick Graham. He's Chief of Insights and Analysis at Mondelēz. Then we have Stephan. Stephan is Chief of Insights and Analytics at PepsiCo. And then we have Jing, who is Chief of Insights and Analytics at Beam Suntory. So what you have in the panel is 3 chiefs and 1 Indian. And also, as a fact-based person, I must place on record that the share of PepsiCo is twice as much as Coke in this panel. Stephan is from PepsiCo, and Nick is ex-PepsiCo, and I'm ex-Coke. So with that, let me welcome, now that you all have a chair, please come and join us. Come, have a seat.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you. Yep. All right. I've spent about 40 years in the insights industry, and there is one thing that always crosses my mind, which is that there is always that one moment in your career which results in insights really becoming central to an organization. And here in this panel, we have 3 leading lights. They all are enormously successful in their own respective companies and have created tremendous business impact. So I would start out the panel discussion by asking each of them, what is that one tentpole moment in your career which resulted in that big transformation of the role of insights within your organization? Why don't I start with Jing as
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here in Yale, and thank you, Ravi, for inviting me. I think every opportunity where I've been asked to lead insights and analytics organizations are really big opportunities for tentpole, but I'll probably pick one which is quite critical. In my current role at Suntory Global Spirits, we just rebranded, as most companies do. I was given a big task to actually globalize the function. The function was very North America focused, and I had to actually build the function from scratch. And I guess there were 2 things that happened. One is I had to build a really strong vision and mission why the company had to invest in the insight function, and I did that with a lot of proof of concept from our past experiences in my past career, but also look at the competitive set we had in the industry. And then secondly, we talked a lot about case studies and issues in the highest levels of the organization. And I sort of used that opportunity to prove the role of insights and how the insights teams can solve those problems in service of growth. So that meeting, it was a series of meetings actually, generated us to have a carte blanche open checkbook to build the team and to build the organization. And I've been very privileged to be leading that for the last 3.5 years.
Awesome, awesome. Stephan, what is that one big tentpole moment that you experienced at PepsiCo?
Thanks, Stan. So, first of all, it wasn't one moment, right? This was like a period of time. But the first thing that came to mind for me was when we were able to show to all those different insights leaders all over the PepsiCo world. PepsiCo is not unlike the Philippines, right? It's like thousands of islands that all kind of take care of themselves. And when we were able to, through the way we did our work, we started to standardize and digitalize certain capabilities so they could really all feed into one data platform and extract learning from that. We were able to show that it was actually possible to create a way of working where if you were learning something somewhere, the whole of PepsiCo was getting smarter. Right? Instead of doing all this local for local work, everybody on their own island, suddenly people started to see, because they were getting what we call meta-learning feedback from our digital platform, suddenly people started to see that if they were using the global methodology and the global standards, not only were they learning what was relevant for their own island, but they were getting instant feedback and, again, what we call meta-learning from similar cases all over the world. And once you get that learning loop going, then, that to me qualifies as a tentpole, because that creates a culture of globalized ways of working and let's say a version of 1 and 1 is 3. That is super powerful.
Awesome, awesome. Nick, what's been your experience?
Yeah, so I'll choose an example from Pepsi, from my old days. I think actually sometimes what you need is a good crisis to prove your value. So when I first joined, I was in the global team at Pepsi, and then I led the US Insights team. And I joined at a moment when Pepsi brand was losing share. We'd had the Kendall Jenner advert, which for some of you remember was not a great moment for us, a really challenging moment. But it was actually the moment for me when insights and analytics could really step up, because there were lots of questions. What's going wrong? What's happening? Where is the consumer going? What do we need to do? And there's lots of attitudes and perspectives. We talked about this earlier. There's lots of people had points of view about what we needed to do. And I think for me, that was a really good example when insights and analytics stepped forward and we said, this is what's happening, this is where it's gone wrong. It actually isn't what you think. It isn't necessarily that we need to be cooler with the younger generation. It was clear from the work that we did very clearly that we just lost sight of some of the things that were driving our competitor, right? They'd really focused on meal times, they'd focused on the key occasions and the needs that were driving the category. So to me, it was a really great moment where we could actually use that to say, this is the value that insights and analytics can bring to the organization, and to provide not just the information and the insight, but the direction. Here's what to go and do now to turn this ship around. So to me, that was, to your prior company, it was a really great example of insights and analytics stepping up and showing ownership and leadership.
Yeah, and when a moment like that happens, then people want more and more of you.
Yes, yeah.
And that's and I always use a phrase which is not probably politically correct. How do you create that oh shit moment?
Yeah. Yeah.
The moment you create that, then people would want more of you, because you bring a perspective that nobody thought you could bring.
Well, I think Megan just talked about this, which is we often talk about the mythical seat at the table.
Yep.
What she said is you earn a seat at the table when you bring value. You don't just get it by default. Nobody just gets a seat at the table. And I think sometimes in insights and analytics, we ask for the seat at the table, but we also need to recognize we need to lean in and earn it and show our value. And I think we have huge value to bring, but actually stepping up and saying, this is the problem, this is what we need to do differently.
Awesome. Talking about seat at the table, I strongly believe that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Or just bring your own chair. Don't worry about
bring your own chair
at the table.
But then, there are lots of experience around us here. Tell me, what are the things that we need to do as a function to really not just ask for a seat at the table, but are given because we deserve it? What is it that we need to do to make sure that we earn that and people come and say, you have a seat? What do we need to do?
I'll take a stab, Stan. To me, I think we need to be business leaders first before we
Awesome.
become researchers.
Yep.
I think our craft talks to us that we are experts in data, in insights, and everything solid. And I think the application and your seat at the table can only be retained if you actually understand what the business is about, how the business makes money, what the challenges are of the business, and you speak the language of the people at the C-suite. You do not, or the board, we don't call it the C-suite, but like you speak the language of the people that you are working with, and you don't sound like a geek trying to like fit your data into the narrative. I think the more you start off as business leaders, and I say that as leaders, not persons, because leaders also imply a huge amount of gravitas and influence. You can easily retain that seat. And then can you imagine that being armed with all of the data in your head and in your PowerPoints? I mean, just makes you a killer participant at the table.
Exactly. And earlier in the marketing panel, they also talked about being a business person first and a marketing person next, and that's what makes a difference. What's your point of view, Stephan?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I came to this role as I've never done an insights role before, and then I became the chief insights officer of a very large organization. I've been a career marketer, and so for me, the natural empathy that I had with the marketers in the company was really a big asset for me, because it made it very easy for me to relate to the people that we were actually doing most of our work with. And the moment I was able to show through what I said in my earlier point, that as a function we were able to bring what I call the global might to the local fight, right? So we were able to work with that marketing leader in, say, Brazil, and not only bring what we've learned in Brazil, but also say, hey, you got a challenge with, say, Gatorade. These are actually the 5 things that we've learned on that particular sports drink business or sports nutrition business or that particular brand in these other 4 markets that have a similar dynamic than yours. The moment you bring that, you're demonstrating that empathy, and with the predicament that the marketeer or innovator or business leader is in. But you really add a lot of value that wasn't often shown before, right? Certainly not from people inside the company. Sometimes an agency would say something like that, but rarely. So that is something that comes to mind. Another thing that comes to mind, super basic, in our line of work, you need to be able to make things simple. Because there's really so much effort, work, and energy out there that is basically causing more confusion, right? So there's so much data, obviously, there's so much information. Everybody's head is exploding with opinions and different ways of slicing, let's say, the data pie. If you can be the person that brings like down-to-earth simplicity through all of that, that is actually very powerful. And there's not a lot of functions focused on that, in my experience.
Nick?
I mean, not much to add to what Jing and Stephan have said. I think we sum it up as 3 things: being clear and simple. So like, what's the problem to solve? What does this information tell us? What do we do with it? Being courageous, which I think we've sort of touched on today, which is isn't what we are naturally. A lot of us are introvert extroverts, right? We sometimes, we're great researchers, great analysts, but the courage to say, this is what this means for the organization, that's a real skill set that we need to build and we need to focus on. And then the last one is being connected, and Jing and Carla earlier talked about this, which is, ultimately we need to remember we are in service of a business that needs to grow. We should be business first and then research and analytics second. And so being connected to the business, not just marketing, but sales, finance, supply chain. I mean, I probably spend more time with our finance team than any other function, and they've been probably some of the best advocates for insights and analytics within our organization. So to me, it's that clarity on what we're trying to solve for, the courage to stand up and own and advocate for things, and then the ability to really deeply connect into the organization beyond, the typical things that insights and analytics might function.
Can I just make a build on that? One of the biggest determinant for me when I know the insights and analytics organization definitely has a seat at the table is when the remit goes further out of marketing.
Yeah.
When the
That's a good
impact
point.
is felt and asked for by supply chain, by the sustainability team, by the R&D team. R&D is kind of obvious, but like, you see what I mean? Like, there's just a lot more. You gauge it not just by the quality of interactions you have with them, but also equally by the quantity. And if you operate at a global level, when all of the markets start asking for more, sometimes than you can ever deliver, then it becomes a real kudos that you are doing a good job somehow, or your team, not just you, but the team is really doing a good job to amplify the impact of the function.
Yeah.
No, I clearly hear, a point of view emerging here in terms of what needs to be done to get a seat at the table. But very often when you talk to a lot of people, you still hear that I need a seat at the table, otherwise I can't be effective. It's never given. You got to earn it.
Take it or earn it.
Why do you think that continues to be an issue for the function in a lot of places? Because maybe from your vantage point you don't see it, but I'm sure you also hear it from various people that I don't have a seat at the table. Is it behavioral thing? Is it an attitudinal thing, or is it a capability thing? What is it? What is it that is holding back?
I would say it's all of the above, right? I mean, it's kind of an obvious answer, but I think it touches on something that Nick just said about we have this insights the PepsiCo way. There's 3 things, and being brave is one of them. You call it courageous, being brave. I think there's a lot of insights people that kind of grow up in an insights career in a bit of an order taker type of mentality, right? It's like, okay, I'm here, I can do the work, and I'll get an agency if needed, but then we do the work together, and then we tell you, what we found, and then we go on to the next project. And I think the really effective insights professionals look at themselves as like indispensable business partners. Really, you can't. You can't make this decision without me. So they insert themselves into any commercial decision-making process where, or period, actually, any commercial decision-making process needs to have a human-centric input and voice at the table. So that it's really about borderline aggressiveness sometimes to insert yourself, get a foot in the door, and force yourself into processes where you're typically not necessarily invited, because the business is impatient. Certainly, the company I'm at, oh my God, it's like I compare to these. I found this picture the other day of a radio that my grandparents had when I was a little boy. It's like one of these old radios, beautiful machine with 2 buttons. Like one is tuning and one is volume. At PepsiCo, 99.98% of the people are all fighting to get their hands on the volume button, right? and there's only a handful of people that are interested in the tuning. And I like to, and if Insights is not in that group, then who is? Yeah. So.
I sit at the board of the Insights Association alongside Katie from Suzy, but one of the things I realize is I've taken that for granted, that what great looks like seems to be obvious to certain companies, and to others it feels like still a journey. And what we're trying to do there is to really expedite the insights functions capabilities within different types of organization, big, medium size, small companies, just so they can really understand defining what great looks like. I've been very privileged, and maybe it's the choice I've made, that the companies I ended up joining, there was a lot of senior sponsorship. And you can never devalue that type of gravitas, because if you're reporting to the CEO or the CMO, suddenly you get the permission to operate and not ask for forgiveness. And that just expedites the speed at which you can really drive change through insights, especially when you're in a transformation mode.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think to what Jing and Stephan said is, don't wait to be asked, insert yourself in. I think, again, I've been lucky, particularly in this job as well, that our CEO says to investors as well, consumer insights and shopper insights is our competitive advantage, right? At the end of the day, as we've said throughout the entire session, we're selling to consumers and shoppers. So if you don't deeply understand their behavior, how to shape it, how to respond to it, then you can't operate as a consumer goods organization. But that's all very good in theory, but every single day, you do have to fight to have your voice heard, to present your perspective, to push to make sure that the business is being human-centric. So to Stephan's point, you do need to be assertive. You need to make sure that even if nobody is asking, you are bringing that perspective, you are bringing that insight to bear.
That's great. I think we have a pretty clear idea of what it takes to really get a seat at the table and what kind of behavior. So as senior leaders in the industry, if you have to recruit and coach people for the next generation, what would you do? What kind of people would you hire? Number one. Number two is, what would be your advice to those people in terms of what kind of behavioral traits they need to exhibit early on? And more importantly, what do you expect leaders within your own functions, how to nurture that talent?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's, as what Carla said, is I probably spend 90% of my time thinking about people, talent, organizational structure, like what's the right way to make, 350, 400 people as effective as possible. I think it's interesting, I've kind of come to the realization that I think across our organization, there are sort of broadly speaking two types of people. There are people who love the business. They're really insightful business leaders. And they're the people who you want on the front line with the category leaders, the brand leaders, the marketing leaders, because fundamentally they understand how to influence and shape the organization through a deep understanding of the consumer and the shopper. And on the other hand, you have people who are deep methodological experts who really understand how to run research in the right way, how to run analytics, how to build models. And we need both sets of people. And I think there's been kind of times in the history of our industry we've tried to force everyone through a similar path. And I think we need to recognize those are two very different and equal paths for our organization. We need people who can be advancing our models, building, we'll talk about AI, building the next generation of solutions. But those are probably not the same people who are going to be the insights leaders in the markets. And that's okay, because I need both sets of people. And nurturing and recognizing that those are different talents needing different career paths, I think is actually going to be a challenge for us moving forward, because we'll need very different structures, I think, to the way that we've typically organized our functions.
Stephan, how do you nurture and what do you look for when you hire a new young talent?
Oh, young talent.
Deal.
You remember that?
So
No, there are a bunch of students from the School of Management here.
Two things building on what Nick says. I totally recognize what you're saying. I mean, the cliche is always to talk, when you talk about talent, is to talk about the T-shaped talent, right? In reality, that's a very rare profile, to have somebody who's an inch wide, mile deep, and a mile wide and inch deep, right, at the same time. That is, it's rare. It does exist, but it's rare. So if you can find it, great. Assuming that you won't find that many people, or not enough of those type of people, you need specialization. So to Nick's point, by the way, I have my inch wide, mile deep, hardcore consumer insights specialists sitting in global COE type of structures, and the people in the business, over time, we've evolved them more and more to in-your-face business partners kind of folks. And building on that second point, I remember having a coffee, sorry Nick about this, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I had a coffee with Nick's business leader boss, so Kirk, the CEO of the beverage business in North America. And we just lost Nick to another company. And this is like, a couple of years ago. And Nick was gone for like 6 months. And I asked him, Kirk, so Nick is gone, how's Insights, doing from your perspective? And he said, God, with Nick, I always felt like I ran into that guy everywhere. I turned a corner and there was Nick again. And then I was in a meeting and he was there, and I opened my email and there was something. I missed that. And that is, it's like every company is different, but in the company that I work at, that is crucial. That is sometimes even more important than functional expertise, because to a certain extent you can borrow or buy functional expertise externally. What you cannot borrow or buy is that level of presence and cut-through clarity and in-your-faceness that you need to bring to the party if the party is a company of 330,000 people that are all fighting to get their hands on the volume button. Right?
Maybe I just have 3 builds. I totally agree there's analytics and insights, but to me, I will level set them. I do not have the capacity to hire 1,000 people like Procter & Gamble has or Unilever.
No, Unilever.
I know. But like for me, there's 3 things I always use as a, one is attitude. It's really, I can teach people function, but I can't teach them how to behave, and not just in the corporate world, like how to behave with a lot of empathy. The second one is they need to be masters at distilling to the core. Whether you're an analytics person or an insights person, you will not bore me with 300 PowerPoint slides. And the last one for me is master storytellers. And to me, these are this whole empathy, this distillation skills, this storytelling. The distillation is super important for me because often with the amount of data we have, our biggest job is not acquisitioning the data. Our biggest job is meta-analyzing and connecting the dots. And these 3 skill sets are just super powerful for me. And if I can find that, you've hit gold. So
awesome. Now the 800-pound gorilla in the room. AI.
Yes.
How is that changing the insights function?
I mean, I feel like we've talked about it a lot today. I feel like it'll change everything and nothing. So I'll explain what I mean by that. I mean, I think as we've talked about, there's a lot of, I mean, Jing just talked about, there's a lot of heavy lifting work that has to happen in our function. Analysis of data, writing surveys, there's a ton of that work, which I do think AI and Gen AI will be incredibly helpful. Now again, I think that just means that frees us up to do the things that we actually need to do. But I think a lot of that heavy lifting, data analysis, diagnostic, a lot of the sort of somewhat repeatable things will be hugely helped through AI. But I mean, and we talked about this obviously on the CMO panel as well. I mean, this is a human industry. At the end of the day, we're trying to understand human behavior, we're trying to predict it, we're trying to anticipate it, we're trying to shape it. And there's always that thing you don't understand, that AI cannot understand, that only human intelligence can understand. So to me, my hope is that what AI does is it frees us up to have more capacity, more time to do the difficult analysis and understanding the human intelligence part, which is really about understanding and predicting human behavior. So I think that's the bit that never changes in our industry. That's what our industry is fundamentally about.
Yeah.
So that bit won't change, but I think a lot of and I think it will be a challenge I know, having talked to some of my team, because a lot of the stuff that we do get pride from today, that brilliantly written 300-page PowerPoint deck, that's not how we're going to judge our success anymore, because that can be all automated.
Correct.
Doing a brilliant business diagnostic, that might be AI that's doing that in future. So we have to then reinvent ourselves and reinvent how we spend our time to where I think we can add much more value. So that's going to be a huge mental paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of people in our industry. I think it's not a threat. I think it's actually a really big opportunity, but I think it will feel like a threat to lots of people.
Yep. My definition of AI is augmenting intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
hopefully.
I think it has a huge ability to make us much smarter than where we are, or at least realize our full potential. Your views on AI, Stephan?
Yeah, look, AI has been around for a long time.
How many Gen AI tools you're using? Tell me it's more than 67.
Say again, tell me.
How many Gen AI tools are you using?
Well, we're quite conservative with Gen AI, not with AI. AI, I think all of us are using it like every day without realizing it millions of times the moment we open our phone. And the moment we do a piece of meta learning or we do some social media based prediction of consumer trends, that's all AI. So we use that a lot. Gen AI, we're conservative because I think I see we as a company are conservative. I see phenomenal opportunities like we all do for Gen AI to add amazing value. I also see how Gen AI can perpetuate stereotypes and existing structures in society that I don't necessarily think are great. Yeah. So so we are really big into building towards a responsible use of Gen AI. Having said that, there's a very, in a way, I guess, let's say benign example, but that I love, that we do use a lot. We have this knowledge management platform called Ask Ada. Ada is our digital platform, and our knowledge management platform is Ask Ada. Okay, and in knowledge management platforms that I'm used to, is like Google. You search for something, and then it spits out 10 links or 15 or 1,500 links of things that are linked to what you're searching for. Read this deck, read that email, whatever. And we've now added to Ask Ada a Gen AI-driven capability that reads all those links and summarizes it for you. Can you imagine that Google? By the way, that's the end of Google as we know it, right? But that's another story, which I think is interesting, but not for now. But it is so. Ask Ada will give. I've got a question. Ask Ada will, within literally the time it took me to snap my fingers, it will find the documents, read them, summarize them, and give me a 250-word summary of all of that, and then. Based on that, I can decide to open link 3 and 7, or I can move on. That is a way of, let's say, improving productivity that I find incredibly inspiring. And then there's the gazillions of examples that all of us can come up with when it comes to, indeed, personalization at scale that were also mentioned earlier today. In marketing, where you can obviously do a lot with that, but I'm not sure yet what the best way to do that is.
Yeah.
No, that's a very interesting point. I remember long ago when I was in Coke, a very senior partner from McKinsey, over a drink, he was telling me, if only Coke knows what it knows, we won't be in business. Yeah. And the knowledge management that you talked about is exactly that. The collective knowledge that exists in each of our companies is so much, but very often we don't know where it exists.
Well, and to Stephan's point is, even when we built knowledge management systems, you still have to try and find the thing you're looking for in the knowledge management system.
And that's where Gen AI can become
absolutely
very, very powerful.
They progress it. I think the processes impact of it, I mean, again, it's not new. The Gen AI piece is the one we're trying to torture test. And the torture test for me is, what is it learning on? Because I think that to me is like, where is the source, where is the basis? So in internal knowledge management systems, it's fine because it trolls to your own systems. We just did this whole piece around, you can now do AI on 3,000 point of sale material in 10 seconds and you get like what's the best performing. And you could never do that before in Insights. You'd take like lots of money and lots of budgets to be able to complete that. But then you begin to ask questions. How does this correlate? If I did a standard test, would I get the same results? Would I make the same decisions? And what is that AI learning on? So just my ask to my team is just to be constantly curious how the AI is becoming more intelligent. Because if I use that as a barrier, and obviously we have some strong rules in place in terms of pilots, but if that is very, very much the last line of defense in terms of AI, then I know the team is working towards the truth and some version of the truth at least.
And I think to Jing's point is, we've got to be careful it doesn't replace curiosity and creativity.
Yeah.
Because I think that, and Stephan, you touched on this as well, I think the danger is because whatever you build is going to learn from everything else that's already been done. So the danger is it just repeats the same things again and again, either perpetuating stereotypes or spitting out the same results because something tested in the same way. And so just being curious and saying, maybe something didn't test well through a Gen AI system, but that could be because it's completely different, and therefore the LLM has no basis to build an analysis of it on. So I think we have to be very careful on some of those, that we're not allowing sort of the historical data that it's built on to bias the results towards something that looks familiar and similar as opposed to actually is good.
A slightly controversial question, just building on what you asked. How do you prevent people from becoming lazy because of AI? Because it answers questions and it looks logical. How do you prevent?
I don't think laziness is a bad thing, first of all, right?
Becoming lazy?
Well, look, it depends on your interpretation of lazy. But I do think that there's a lot of work happening in any organization and in individual people's lives that doesn't add a lot of value, right? Not for the individual, not for the organization. And so if laziness means that you can automate that in some way, and you become less busy in your head, I think that's major progress, because to my earlier point, if in any large organization, let me stick to my own, 330,000 people, the vast majority of those people get paid their salary to make, move, and sell our products and services every single day. And that's fantastic, and that's why the company is there, right? But there's only, in today's construct and the way we work, do our work, and the way we're organized, there's only a handful of people that get paid a salary to sometimes think like, are we actually doing the right thing? I mean, yeah, people are buying it, but shouldn't we do it a little different? Or, shouldn't we, shouldn't we be thinking about this business in an entirely different way? Shouldn't we think about new channels? Shouldn't we, creativity often gets buried under a ton of work that we all need to get through. So back to your point, if Gen AI can take care of a lot of that, I wish all members of my team, had a day in the week, if not 3 days in the week, to lay in a hammock and think about my business for only 50% of their time. No, we would make more progress. I am absolutely sure.
No, what triggered my question was what Jing said. Yeah, it plowed through some 10,000 piece point of sale materials and said what works and what does not work. But if the person is not curious enough to challenge it,
that's right,
then you can take that as gospel truth and make it a company-wide practice.
correct.
Yeah.
And that's a worry. So that, how do you prevent that? That's my reason behind the question on laziness. Yeah, how do you make sure that you encourage people to be curious? You did touch upon the curiosity,
I think that's,
but there is also an element of bravery that people need to have. Not everything that the machine spits out is necessarily true. How do you actually inculcate that new way of thinking among people is the question.
Yeah, just to complete that testing of the point of sale, so we do a lot of it, Jim Beam, Makers, Hibiki, I mean, there's tons. The thing that we do is that we then connect that information to other pieces of information, because it can never be a standalone, and this is what we do in Insights. We have to make sure that that doesn't become the gospel truth, but it does free up the time.
Right.
There's an Asian saying, you can't think if you're being chased by a tiger. And we're often being chased by tigers in our companies because there's just so much pressure to deliver on things tomorrow. And so the level of capacity and capability that AI can do, done in the right way, integrated with the right data sets, integrated with the right mindset, to me is incredibly powerful moving forward. And I just want to always ask the question, why is this better?
Why?
Why is it better than what we're currently doing?
So in what I said before, I mean, I assume a certain dose of, let's say, restlessness, curiosity that I would want to find in any insights person, right? I mean, but once that's there, then indeed, if you just cage the tiger every now and then, right? Then you get some really added value thinking that drives competitive advantage.
And I think also the ability to test a lot more paths, directions, options. I mean, your example of the POS material is exactly one of the things we're looking at. And you can test thousands of iterations of something which you would never be able to do. So it doesn't actually, it's a more efficient way and a much more powerful way to get to insight. It may feel lazy but who wants to test 400,000 iterations of something? But again, with the right curiosity applied, it can be incredibly powerful.
It can be powerful.
Yeah.
Another, probably not 800-pound, but maybe a 400-pound gorilla.
Okay.
Which is the perennial conflict between data and analytics function and the insights function. Typically, the data and analytics function sits under the IT function, and the insights either sits in the C-suite or a CMO or whatever the organization is. And there is always a little bit of trading on each other's toes that happens. How do you guys handle it in your own respective organizations? Do you have that conflict to begin with? Is that a challenge, and how do you handle it?
So I would say I've been lucky within Mondelēz that it's not, it could be a battle, but it isn't a battle. I think we've respected that we have different roles to play in the organization. I think going back to what we talked about before, I think if we define ourselves as we just do research and analytics, then there would be a conflict because there'll be overlap. If we see ourselves as the strategic growth advisor for the organization, then there's no conflict because that's a really clear role for us in the organization. Only we can bring in, we have a really good working relationship between the insights team and the data analytics team because they respect that only we understand the consumer, the shopper, the business, what the business needs. They can deliver incredible analytical solutions at scale. Together we can be really powerful. Most of my team can't do what they can do, and equally they respect that they can't do what we can do as well. But I think it comes from also us having clear roles, but also us elevating our role within the organization. Back to exactly what Jing said at the beginning, which is if you define yourself as research and analytics, you're defining yourself by the tactical things you're doing every day as opposed to the value you're bringing to the organization.
Any wild agreement, disagreement?
I'm agreeing, but there's one thing that I feel like analytics seems to be sitting in finance and digital, media. I think the biggest challenge is I made my job simple by combining insights and analytics in one. But even if I combine that, there are parts of the organization that tap into data, tap into analytics, that the job is to really break the silos and get it fed into your data pipe so it doesn't feel like separated as you build your whole story. And that to me sometimes can still be a barrier, particularly if the reporting lines are very different. I would say in our company we try, but there's still a lot of politics maybe, or territoriality that can get in the way. But again, it now sits on the function leads to really understand what the end game is, to be able to talk about either a post-launch campaign, storytelling, or something else. But having visibility of all of that pipes of data is the most important thing that I'm trying to manage at the moment.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I completely in the same way. I see those two functional areas as totally complementary. I always look, the way I call it, I look for waves that I can serve as a function in the company if I want to drive change. PepsiCo has been investing now for a couple of years significant resources in driving, let's say, commonality and efficiency and effectiveness in its, let's call it, back of the house functions, and creating global data lakes and data engineering type of work is a big part of that. That's a wave that I can serve to help me standardize scorecards, capabilities, practices globally. Right, so it's really a phenomenal jump-off point for me to drive progress in my own function. So I see that as super complementary. And finally, the better they do their work, the more the insights people are freed up to drive competitive advantage.
So it's almost like AI.
Process.
It releases time for you to do the more creative side of the work.
The other thing, and maybe I'll build on this last point, at the end of the day, the company wants one version of the truth.
Correct.
Or some version of the truth that doesn't conflict if the other team produced it or the central team produced it. And often that's what we're really aiming for, so that we can make the decisions faster and we're not mucking around. Is this the right data? Why is their data different from what you're saying, Jing? So it becomes a real challenge, and we need to be obsessed around the one version of truth that the company is willing to bank themselves on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so on that note, leave it open to the floor to ask any questions of any of us. Rafael.
All right, this is going to sound like a really dumb question for a conference titled Insights On. What is your definition of an insight? Because I have worked on vocabulary inside organizations where different teams, different departments come to the table, and one person believes an insight is this, another person believes an insight is this. Do you all, as you come together, or maybe everybody has a different definition, what is your definition of an insight?
I have one, but I will leave it to the panel to answer.
Go ahead, Stan.
Oh, Stan.
Yeah, we want to hear
Don't be
Stan.
shy.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, my definition of insight is simple. Something that is retrospectively self-evident. And both conditions have to be met. When I tell you this is an insight, you should look at me and say, duh, that's obvious. And my next question would be, was it obvious to you before I told you? And you said no, then you have a great insight. It doesn't happen very regularly, but when it does happen, you know it moves business big time.
I think a great example for me was the previous speaker. She talked about how she pivoted the positioning of her whole company or company's communication from fear to trust. And trust being like a really motivating type of, let's say, emotion. Fear, being the opposite in many ways.
I think
There's an insight at the foundation of that I think is super powerful.
I think Julie from Smirnoff used this example as well, which is, for me, an insight has a tension in it because there's some sort of problem, explicit or implicit, that unlocks an opportunity, right? So your retrospective example, Stan, is because there's an aha moment that it creates.
Yep.
I find the biggest battle is not between data and analytics and insights and analytics, it's between information and insight. There's a ton of information out there, but there's often not a lot of insight. Because an insight has to have, if you don't really know what to do with it, if it doesn't open, unlock a door, if you don't go, oh, I wonder if, like, what does this make me curious about, what does this mean, then it's not really an insight. And to me, it usually has some sort of, it could be a contradiction in it, it could be a tension, it could be a problem, but it has something there that means, you have to go and find out more about it.
And my only build is, and it actually drives you to action.
Yes, yeah.
So to me, the magic of the best insights we've come across in our CPG world are the ones that sort of drove a movement, an action, a platform that suddenly sort of drove a change in the brand and consumer behavior.
By the way, your question is not a dumb one at
By the
all,
way,
because this is an existential question. Because you ask 20 people, you'll get 20 definition of insights. And therefore, if an insight is staring at you in your face, you won't even recognize it. So having one common understanding of what an insight is very critical. And so it's not an immaterial question by any chance.
And it's not just having a definition, but training people on what to look for. Because I can't tell you how many times I sit in a meeting and somebody says the word insight and shows something and I roll my eyes because I'm like, that's not really an insight. But training people and giving feedback. I mean, we did getting to great insights training for the team, but we actually found the most powerful thing was then doing like hands-on work sessions with people afterwards, where people would bring in, here's what I think is an insight, and actually we'd help them make it better by just asking better questions about what was driving it, what was behind it. So I think it's a coaching thing as well.
I have a question. I think everything that you said, each one of you, I resonated so very well. I was like, this is my problem, this is my problem. The battle between business and IT, that's what we faced before. I was on the IT side of data and analytics, and it's amazing to see that how insights is different from data and analytics. My question is, now, before in the IT world, we faced different problems. We recently got merged with customer service, and now my role is to bring out those insights from data and analytics. But one of the problems that we face is the single source of truth. Data is disparate in various parts of the systems across the organization, and there's no single source of truth. And when I go back to my organization head for customer service, hey, we want to bring out insights, but I don't have the fundamentals, the foundation to bring out the insights, and my head says, well, this is not my problem. My job is to drive the business, to grow the business. This is not my problem. Have you ever faced that kind of situation in your journey, and how did you challenge and accept that challenge and grow from it?
I'll take a stab at it, and feel free to add to it. I think she raised a very valid point about single version of truth. And personally, what I've seen is there's usually a lot of debate around what is that single version of the truth, because there are different people who have different versions of truth. And that's where I think the whole IT function can play an incredible role, because back in the days when I started my career, the data size was nowhere near as big as it is today. So you really need technology, you need certain capabilities which as insights professionals we might or might not have. And they can drive the single version of the truth so that everybody is singing on the same hymn page. Once you sing on the same hymn page, then we can figure out the so what and the now what. And that is mission critical. That is absolutely mission critical. That's where I see the clear role sort between the IT function and the insight function. And otherwise, you'll be just having debates internally about is the market share 20.3 or 21.4? Because you go to different market, the same category, same country, you get two different shares. And that is an unproductive utilization of people's time. And you need technology to bring it all together and create that one version. And I don't think that's the role of insight function.
The only other build I would say is like often, if I know that there's multiple debates happening on the versions of truth, I rally everybody to focus on what are we trying to solve for. Because when you do that, then you focus it on the business question and the solve, and that's often where insights people are really powerful. And maybe there's a truth version from this, and the combined versions of those actually answer the question so much better.
Yep.
And that's what I mean. Like, it doesn't have to be coming from a single source. The one version of the truth, the single source of truth, is actually a combined element from the different experts in the organization. But at least everybody uses that, because then you don't have passive-aggressive behavior. Oh, I think the data is this. I'm going to do it this way. But then ground them on the business question, and often that sort of like shuts everybody up and said, okay, what are we really trying to solve for?
There's a question here.
Related question to that. What's the role of the insights function in terms of helping different business units standardize their brand planning and business planning processes? So I presume you have multiple business units that you have to support. Are there different ways of working across them? Have you had to normalize them and work through those differences?
Yeah, that's, so I'm lucky enough to also be head of global marketing excellence, so very much engaged with trying to raise the floor and the ceiling of the way, let's say, marketing gets done throughout the company. What I find is that it makes a ton of sense to combine those two roles in my, with let's say in my team. Why? Because insights people are incredibly motivated inherently because of the type of work that they do, to drive some consistency in the way a brand gets defined, a brand plan gets articulated, a briefing gets assessed throughout the world. Because insights professionals in a company like mine always work across markets, work with very, many different teams that all work on one and the same brand, for example. And so there's a huge level of engagement of the insights team with helping to build the tools as well as with building the capability in the company. I find insights leaders are very often the best, let's say, capability builders that you can hope for in the whole commercial spectrum within a company.
And we just reinvented our category brand growth planning growth wheel, our process, and we said that Insights and Analytics owns the first two parts of that, because I think fundamentally Insights and Analytics leaders as the sort of strategic growth advisors for the business are really best placed to help shape where is growth going to come from? How's the brand and the business performed? And to Stephan's point, do it in a way that is consistent, not exactly the same, but is in the same structure, right? So you follow the same sort of logic of how am I going to unpack where growth is going to come from, but still show that curiosity. The tension is always that you want to standardize it and normalize it to the point that everyone feels like they're talking the same language, but you have to allow the fact that every country and brand is going to be different. And so creating the paths for curiosity to follow so that you allow people to find the nugget of opportunity that is unique to that particular brand and category, but in a sort of common structure and way of thinking.
Couple of hands here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your remarks. So we're seeing that insights teams are getting leaner, both from a personnel as well as investment budget we have to spend. But of course, we still need strategic insights for our brands. So I was wondering, as we maybe are waiting for AI to catch up to help us with that, what are your strategies for helping your teams deal with this?
Can I answer this question? I love working for challenger companies, and my companies I've worked for often have very, very lean teams and budgets sometimes depending on the problem we're trying to solve. But I can tell you one thing, the best researchers I've ever worked with are the ones that are strapped with resources.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I have been blown away when you have nothing else to work with. Creativity becomes your biggest weapon, and not making up data, but really utilizing the amount of sources and information influx that's available out there, complemented with consumer discussions, one-to-ones. In Beam Suntory, we have a term called Gemba, where we go to the place of value. It's like, it's just a Japanese term for like really going to deep ethnographies. But we are very, very, I still remember those research, I've worked with so many researchers around the world, I'm sorry for them, but you know, they are the best researchers I've worked with because they can really start using a lot of their questioning skills to answer the questions for the business in a very creative manner.
I also find if you focus sufficiently on the so what of every piece of work that you do, it's not that hard to articulate the value that you bring, and then subsequently make the case for additional resource or in whatever shape or form.
Or indeed, sometimes when you, to Jing's point, when you have a lean resources but also a really tight brief, you'd be amazed at how little you actually do need to do, because if you're really clear on the question, you can be zero focused on how to answer it. And actually some of our teams, as you say, actually some of our smaller, leaner teams are actually the most creative and the most productive because they really, really focus on how to solve that problem. So not always an easy one, but actually sometimes, you know, constraint can be the mother of invention there.
Yeah, I agree.
My personal experience has been that if you focus on the what of research, you become a subservient provider. If you focus on the so what, you are at the door. But if you focus on the now what, you have a seat at the table. So that's a journey that one needs to go through. It is a choice that we have to make. There'll be a bunch of people, as you said, who are super functional experts. They are focusing on the what, which is fine. You need them. You need the expertise.
Yeah.
But if you really want a seat at the table, it's the so what and the now what that drives you to get a seat at the table. There's a couple of hands here.
Yeah, my question is about the potential future of how we use insights. Each of you has organizations that lead teams that solve problems for your own enterprise. But do you see that in the future that use becomes almost like a public utility with all the data integration that you have and all the collaboration across industries? Do you see a future where insights become something like water that everybody taps into? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to solve questions about your customers in your own business, but ultimately the end game is understand the customers as a whole. So is that future possible?
My view is that insights are an incredible competitive advantage, and depending on you who share it with. So I do a lot of share outs with heads of insights across maybe not a water for everybody, but a water for a pool, maybe non-competing industries, because you know, one of the things that I believe we get better at is learning from our peers that are non-competitive. And I mean, I'd like to talk to Stephan Gans a lot on his beverage strategy, but you know, we're gonna be competing in some markets. So I do believe insights are a massive competitive advantage of a company, and maybe water within a pool in a specific set of pool that's non-compete is probably where I see it more.
Yeah, I can imagine that future, the day that PepsiCo and Coca-Cola merge, and the day that Mondelēz and Nestlé merge, then I can see that happen.
It'll become water. Sure.
Where I do think there will be more collaboration in whatever form will be around things like sustainability, health and well-being, where there's a sort of a shared purpose and a shared need to help shape consumer behavior. So again, to Jing's point, we have to be careful around competition and competition law, but I think there are certainly areas we need to collaborate on. I mean, sustainability is a great one where, you know, we're doing a lot of work on recycling, but it only works if people recycle. And so actually working together on how to shape that behavior is to our advantage, but ultimately, obviously, to the planet's advantage as well.
One last question.
So I've got a mic here, and I promise this is my last question of the day. You are a prestigious panel with a prestigious moderator. There are a lot of up-and-coming marketers and insights professionals in the room. What would you tell them is the one single thing they should do to someday sit in your seats?
One thing they must do? Well, okay. You go. I have a point of view, but you finish.
Okay, it's a bit of an existential question, Bill. Let me just put it this way. If you are given a choice of which industry you want to lead, make sure you have passion and love for that industry. Because at the end of the day, it's also what fuels your curiosity and your passion to understand and serve and move that business. With no disrespect, in my younger years, when I was at the region in Singapore, I was asked to be head of insight for jet fuels. And I'm not really interested in jet fuels, but I was interested in...
Such an exciting category.
Yeah, I wasn't. But, you know, I was excited by beauty, healthcare, CPG, and Outbev. And so you have to have some level of passion for the industry that you end up choosing, because you want to be able to do your best work while living your best life, because a lot of us are in this career sometimes for a long time, and it has to be something you really enjoy.
I would say, I think the biggest skill that will see you through whatever happens to our industry will be learning how to tell powerful stories with data. Because wherever that data comes from, whatever that data is, whatever Gen AI is able to solve for us, that powerful storytelling will never go away. And I think, you know, we started this conversation about how you earn the seat at the table, and I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. The powerful storytellers are the ones that will have that seat.
Yeah, it's a tough act to follow. I mean, I agree with both your points for sure. I would just add that if you want to have a long-term career in consumer insights, you got to be honest with yourself about the fact that you really have to be in love with people, right? And that sounds like, you know, that can come in many different shapes and forms. My dad is a shrink, right? He loves people. But it was an easy decision for me to not pursue that path, because I didn't want that. But the work that I do is very much about empathy and about a love for, you know, for what makes us all tick in a way. And that if you don't have that you can fake that for a job or two, but not for a career. Right?
My build on all this would be on the assumption that we all have good skills, good competencies, good ability to connect the dots. If you have all that, one thing that will differentiate a good insight person from a not so good insight person is the word bravery. Mm-hmm. As long as you can actually go and stand up and really voice what you actually believe in and stand your ground, the function will always be relevant going forward.
What a way to end.
On that note, thank you so much. Thank you, guys.